What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp podcast. I am here with nobody. I am here with myself, me, myself, and I. And today, like we said during the live draft reaction episode, today is just going to be talking about kind of wrapping up the draft and talking about some trade news that happened, as well as a free agency preview. So, rounds 2 through 7 of the draft. We'll start with the end of round 1. There wasn't a whole lot of super interesting things to talk about. The two most interesting things that happened were the Columbus Blue Jackets and the New Jersey Devils went off the board a little bit with some of their first round picks. The Columbus Blue Jackets ended up drafting somebody who basically, for lack of a better term, none of the analysts had really even ever heard of up to that point. Let's see if I can find out his name. I kind of forgot his name real quick. But it were both Russian kids. Yegor Chinakhov was the 21st overall pick made by the Columbus Blue Jackets. If you watch the reaction of the analysts and the guys on the panel that were doing the draft, they didn't even have any video on him. They didn't really have any stats on him. They were kind of just shocked. He, from what I understand, was not projected in the first round, was not projected in the second round, maybe a third or fourth rounder from what I read about him. He was apparently outside of the top 100 available prospects in this draft. So that's just interesting from the standpoint of there has to be something that the Devils or that the Blue Jackets scouting staff saw in him that they were able to convince Jarmo Kekalainen to draft him that early, because you have to think that he might have been available in the second or the third round, and instead they decided to just say, you know what, he's our guy, and we're gonna get our guy. So not really sure. It's going to be definitely interesting to track him. I mean, for all we know, he could be the best player in this draft. There's also something to be said for a lot of these European players were playing later or earlier, either later into the pandemic or earlier when coming out of the pandemic, although we're still in a pandemic, obviously, than the North American skaters. So maybe that's just something they saw. Maybe they had a little bit more time to scout him, and they said, you know what, like, he's just the guy. We want him, and we're just going to take him as early as we can. So very interesting pick there. The Devils, with the 20th overall pick, took Shakir Mukhamadullin. Again, another off-the-board kind of pick. From what I understand, Shakir was slated to go towards the second or third round. Really interesting pick there for the New Jersey Devils. Again, I don't know much about him, but another Russian guy, another Russian kid for the Devils prospect pool. So that was really the most interesting things that happened after our podcast ended. Second rounds. It was more. There was a lot of pick swapping going on. The draft took a long time, but there were some trades that were made involving picks in the draft that I think are more interesting than the draft itself. So we're gonna start with the big one. The Ottawa Senators acquired Matt Murray, goaltender from the Pittsburgh Penguins, for forward Jonathan Gruden and a 2020 second round pick. That was the Columbus Blue Jackets pick. So. Murray, everyone's more or less familiar with who Matt Murray is. At this point, he's 26 years old, two-time Stanley Cup champion in 2016 and 17 with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Last season, not the best for him. 38 games played, 20 wins, a 2.87 goals against, and a 8.99 save percentage. So not the best season for Matt Murray. Gruden, The forward prospect going back the other way is a 20-year-old fourth-round pick from 2018. I don't really know much about him, but I think this trade ends up working out well for both sides. From the Pittsburgh Penguins perspective, the writing was kind of on the wall for Matt Murray. He didn't play fantastically in the regular season. Didn't really play. He wasn't terrible in the playoffs, but he wasn't the Stanley Cup kind of guy that we saw Matt Murray being. Although I think, honestly, Matt Murray reminds me a lot of Corey Crawford in that he's a good goalie on the right team at the right time. And that's not to take anything away from the talent of Corey Crawford for those Chicago Blackhawks teams in 2013 and 15, or that's not to take away from anything that Matt Murray did in 2016-17, but it reminds me of that, where Murray's not really an elite guy. Crawford was never really considered a super elite goaltender. He had great numbers for sure. For the Chicago Blackhawks, Murray put up some pretty good seasons for the Pittsburgh Penguins. This year in the playoffs, it really wasn't his fault. He posted a 2.50 and a 9.14. I mean, he did what he had to do. Realistically speaking, on a team like the Pittsburgh Penguins, if your goalie is letting in anything less than 2.5 goals a game, you really should be winning. Those Pittsburgh Penguins roster should be able to put in at least 3 goals a game, you would have to think. So, but going back to what I was saying, he reminds me a lot of Corey Crawford, and it's not to say that Crawford or Murray are bad goalies. It's just that, right place, right time. They happen to be good enough for some pretty good teams, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for the Pittsburgh Penguins, Tristan Jarry, during the regular season had a 2.43 and a 9.21. He only played 1 game in the playoffs, but Jarry really kind of cemented himself as the next goalie for the Pittsburgh Penguins, although it might be a little preemptive of them to just hand him the reins for a team that has Stanley Cup aspirations. He's only ever played 62 games total in the National Hockey League. Last season was really his first full season since 2018 when he played as a backup. But to me, this move by the Pittsburgh Penguins is less about what Murray hasn't done and more about what Tristan Jarry has done, where he's kind of forced their hand to say, I'm the starter now. Like, I've deserved this starting role. Tristan Jarry is also cheaper than Matt Murray in theory. Tristan Jarry is making $3.5 million a year for the next 3 years, which I think is a perfect contract length for him. Matt Murray still has not been signed by the Ottawa Senators, but by the same token, he is an RFA, and he did get a qualifying offer, so he will not be an unrestricted free agent. He's also arbitration eligible, so we'll see what kind of money he's going to get. Likely he's going to ask for like $4 to $5 million, probably on a long-term deal since he's 26 at this point. And realistically speaking, when you look at this Pittsburgh Penguins roster, you can make a strong argument that they really only have a couple of years left at peak contendership. Evgeny Malkin is 34. Sidney Crosby is 33. Chris Letang is 33. The core, those core 3 pieces, Malkin, Crosby, and Letang, are all north of 33 at this point. 3 years from now, when Jarry's contract is up, Malkin's 37, Crosby's 36, Letang is 36. They do have some nice young pieces. Jake Gensel's only 26 himself. They acquired Kasperi Kapanen, who's only 24 years old. Brian Dumoulin is 29. He's still got another 3 to 4, 5 years left of peak contendership. But to me, this move by the Pittsburgh Penguins tells me that they're trying to squeak out the last 3 to 4 years of Stanley Cup contendership out of this roster. And if that means you sacrifice a little bit in net to get a cheaper option in Tristan Jarry, who signed for 3 years, then it's worth it to them. From the Ottawa Senators side, I mean, this was a no-brainer. The Ottawa Senators, Craig Anderson was not returning to the team. Don't really know if they would have wanted to, they weren't going to sign him, and it makes sense to not sign him at this point. And so they were going into the season with Anders Nilsson, Marcus Hoberg under contract. You trade for Matt Murray. He's 26 years old. Brady Tkachuk is 21. Colin White is 23. Thomas Chabot is 23. That's your core right there. Tkachuk, Colin White, Chabot, along with, the plethora of other prospects that haven't even cracked the NHL roster yet. But a 23, a 21, and a 23-year-old, you get a 26-year-old goaltender that can, play games and make these games meaningful. This move is a move for the future, but it's also a move for now, for the Ottawa Senators to say, look, we have tremendous amount of prospects on this team and in this system, specifically in the back end. I mean, the amount of prospects that the Ottawa Senators have on the back end is just unbelievable. Thomas Chabot, Eric Branstrom, Jacob Bernard Docker, and they drafted this year. I believe they also took a defenseman. If I'll pull up the draft here, if NHL.com wants to load, I could tell you. I believe they ended up taking a defenseman. Yeah, they took Jake Sanderson. With their 5th overall pick. Of course, they also took Timothy Stützle, another great piece for their front end, and they also took Ridley Greig with their 28th pick. So Tkachuk, Stützle, Colin White, Greig, and then you look at their back end, Chabot, Bernard Docker, Branstrom, Sanderson. I mean, that's filthy. That realistically is a pretty filthy lineup. But this move for Matt Murray now means, hey, maybe we won't be eliminated from the playoffs by December. Maybe we can play meaningful games, maybe not down to the wire just yet. They're still missing a decent amount of pieces on this roster, I believe. There's still a couple of pieces on the team that they need to fill out for sure. They could use some scoring help up front. They need a little bit of stability on the back end, but that just comes with age with guys like Chabot and Branstrom. But, if you shore up the goaltending now, you sign Matt Murray to a long-term contract, maybe instead of playing meaningful games only up until December, you're playing meaningful games until, February. And that does a lot for a young core. It does a lot for a young roster to be able to play meaningful hockey games down the stretch. And I think they kind of learned their lesson when those Ottawa Senators teams of the past never really, except for a few weird spikes in Craig Anderson's career, didn't have consistent goaltending, and they're building from the back end out. So I think this is a no-brainer for the Ottawa Senators. It's a no-brainer for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think both teams accomplished what they wanted to with this deal. I feel good about this deal for both teams. To me, it's just a straight-up hockey trade. The Minnesota Wild acquired Nick Bonino, a 2020 second and a 2020 third, for Luke Kunin and a 2020 fourth from the Nashville Predators. Kind of a weird trade to me. I don't really know what the Minnesota Wild are trying to do with this roster. They made the executive decision not to sign Mikko Koivu, right? They made the executive decision to trade away Devin Dubnyk. And you're thinking, okay, like they're getting rid of some of these contracts. You're not signing Mikko Koivu. You're getting rid of Devin Dubnyk's contract. They're making the decision to maybe get a little younger, play some of the younger guys up front, right? Now that spot on the 3rd or 4th line is open. Now that Koivu's not there, the spot on the power play gets opened up. You're probably going to start Kaapo Kähkönen with Alex Stalock next year for the Minnesota Wild. He's finally going to get the go-ahead nod. But then you do trades like acquiring Marcus Johansson for Eric Staal, and trading for Nick Bjugstad and Nick Bonino. And it just, I don't understand. Like, where What's the vision for this Minnesota Wild roster? Are you rebuilding? Are you, or not Nick Bukestad? Yeah, Nick Bukestad. They did trade for Nick Bukestad. Yeah. Are you rebuilding? Are you not rebuilding? Are you going for it again? Are you somewhere in the middle? I don't see the vision for this roster, and they still have several contracts on this team that go for a very long time. I mean, Zach Parise and Ryan Suter still have 2, 3, 4, 5 more years left on that deal. Jonas Brodin, after this season, has a 7-year contract extension that runs until 2028 at $6 million a year. Jared Spurgeon, his contract is 7 years. He's already 30 years old. I don't understand what the vision for this roster is. If I'm the Minnesota Wild right now, you have to look at this situation with all these long-term contracts and just say, this is untenable. We cannot win with a team like this. We cannot win paying Jared Spurgeon $7.5 million for the next 7 years, along with Jonas Brodin's contract, with the Parise contract, with the Suter contract. You can't do it. And they're paying Matt Zuccarello for another 4 years at $6 million. Victor Rask contract, $4 million the next 2 years. You have to look at this roster and say, this is not sustainable. This is not conducive to long-term success. And I felt like they took a step in the right direction when they said we're not going to sign Mikko Koivu. And I felt like they took a step in the right direction when they said we're going to trade away Devan Dubnyk. But then they trade for these older veterans and they get rid of Luke Kunin, or Kunin, whatever you want to call it. Nick Bonino last year put up 35 points in 67 games played. Luke Kunin put up 31 points in 63 games played. He put up 4 less points in 4 less games played. Sure, he was an RFA, but you're going to tell me that you couldn't have gotten him for less than the $4.1 million for 1 year that you're paying Nick Bonino? Even if you're paying Kunin $5 million, he's still significantly younger. He's 10 years younger than Nick Bonino. And Nick Bonino, even combined with Nick Bukestad and Mark Johansson, that makes up a pretty solid second line that does not move the needle enough for the Minnesota Wild to consider themselves contenders. They can't compete with the St. Louis Blues. They can't compete with the Dallas Stars. They can't compete with the Colorado Avalanche. They just can't. And if they somehow get out of their division, they can't compete with the Vancouver Canucks. If the Oilers sign a goalie this season, they can't compete with the Edmonton Oilers. Let's say by they make a miracle run to the Stanley Cup Finals, they can't compete with the Washington Capitals or the New York Islanders, or the Tampa Bay Lightning, or if the Toronto Maple Leafs buy into a bottom six and defense this year, they can't compete with the Toronto Maple Leafs. This roster, at best, taking into consideration the division that they're in, is a bubble playoff team with no hope for a Stanley Cup. Mark my words right now. If the Minnesota Wild win the Stanley Cup with this roster next season, if they win the 2020-2021 Stanley Cup, you can write this down. I will buy a Zach Parise jersey and I will auction it off or raffle it off on this channel. Somebody will win a Minnesota Wild jersey on this channel if they win the Stanley Cup next year, but they're not going to. So I feel good about saying that. It's just not going to happen. And so the making trades like this, where you get rid of a 22-year-old kid for 32-year-old Nick Bonino, that's a trade that a bubble Stanley Cup team should make to put them over the edge. That's a trade that a team like the Colorado Avalanche, who maybe need some depth and grit and net front presence, would make a trade for. Not the Minnesota Wild. For Nashville, they make out like gangbusters on this trade. You get a 22-year-old to put up 31 points. I mean, doesn't really move the needle for Nashville either, but they get younger, and getting younger is never a bad thing. It is never a bad thing in this league to get younger. So I don't understand this trade for the Minnesota Wild. I don't understand where this roster is going. I don't see the vision, and I'm just confused. One other trade of note, the New York Rangers officially move out Lias Andersson for a 2020 second-round pick. Lias Andersson goes to the LA Kings. Good move for the LA Kings. They get younger. The Rangers get a second-round pick. That was the Vegas Golden Knights. It's never, like I said, it's never a bad thing to get younger in this league. So I don't have a lot to say about this trade. I was kind of hoping that either Steve or Tim would be here to talk about it, but unfortunately that's not the case. So in other news, Nashville buys out Kyle Turris. Kyle Turris' experiment is officially over in Nashville. So he's going to cost Nashville $2 million for the next 8 years of cap hit. Yikes. But I think Nashville's kind of recognizing that you can't have 3 second-line playmaking centers on the same team with no real goal scorers and expect it to work. Their best goal scorer is Philip Forsberg, who's not a bad player, definitely one of the better players on that team. But they don't really have like a Laine or a Tarasenko or a Steven Stamkos, whose name has actually been coming up in trades, to warrant having Duchesne, Turris, and Johansson all on the same team. So Kyle Turris gets bought out. We'll see if he gets a contract in the open market. Matt Niskanen retires from Philly, which is interesting. So we'll see if Philly fills that hole with. I thought Niskanen was a great ad for them last year. He retires, kind of unfortunate because I think they had one of the better defensive cores in the league. Now they're going to need to find a way to replace a very serviceable defenseman. Some signings. Max Domi signs a 2-year, $5.3 million contract with the Columbus Blue Jackets. I think that's great. The Columbus Blue Jackets acquired Max Domi for Josh Anderson, who, by the way, Josh Anderson himself, just a few minutes ago, signed a 7-year contract extension. 7 years at $5.5 million with the Montreal Canadiens. So clearly they see something in Josh Anderson. You have to think that they do. I don't think 7 years at this point is worth it for a generally injury-prone, unproven player. If he turns into that 30 to 40 goal guy that everyone thinks he can be, I mean, that's a pretty good cap hit. Paying less than $6 million for a guy like that is pretty solid. If his injuries continue to pile up, that 7-year contract is going to hurt. So we'll see what ends up going with that there. Columbus Blue Jackets go a little bit more conservative with Max Domi. They give him 2 years, which I think is a fine contract. It walks him straight into UFA status, unfortunately, for the Blue Jackets, though. So that is a kind of minefield they're going to have to navigate when the time comes. But the $5.3 million, you could say it's a little steep for a guy like Max Domi, who's kind of bounced around the league, but it's only 2 years. Worst case scenario, they just let him walk. Jesse Puljujarvi signed a 2-year contract with the Edmonton Oilers, kind of repairing the relationship that they had. Expect him to be on the top 6 next season, considering that they're not signing some key guys like Anthony Ciu and Tyler Ennis, who have been informed that they will not be back to the Edmonton Oilers. So expect Jesse Puljujarvi to be in the top 6 for the Edmonton Oilers, a cheap top 6 option for them. Pretty good signing. We'll see if he can live up to his hype. Defenseman Dylan DeMello signs a 4-year, $3 million contract with the Winnipeg Jets. I think this is a great contract for Dylan DeMello. The Jets obviously still need some help on that back end. They still need a little bit more growth and a little bit more foundation. So signing a guy like Dylan DeMello, who is reliable in his own end, is great for that back end because it frees up some guys like Neil Pionk or Yoki Haru. Sami Niku, to do the kind of offensive plays that they like to make. So I think that's a great signing for Winnipeg. He kind of gives them a little bit more stability on that back end that they desperately need. I really do think the Winnipeg Jets are kind of like 1 or 2 defensemen away and a second-line center away from being like legitimate Stanley Cup contenders every year. So we'll see if they decide to dip into the free agency market at all. Speaking of the free agency market, we'll kind of get to the point of this whole video. We're going to talk about top available UFAs and some interesting names that are coming up with that. So obviously we'll start with the big names. We'll start with defenseman Alex Pietrangelo. So it came out today that negotiations between Pietrangelo and the St. Louis Blues have all but not stalled out, but all but kind of ended at this point. They're basically just kind of wait until free agency starts to say, their goodbyes. It seems like it's still an option for Pietrangelo to return. It definitely seems like it's something he'd be interested in. He said several times that he would totally be interested in coming back to the St. Louis Blues. And it seems like even if he goes to free agency and fields offers from other teams, that the Blues are still on his list, that he would take a contract with them. I'm not quite sure what teams are going to be really in the market for him, specifically just because there are so many teams, right now trying to dump cap, that it's going to be interesting to see what teams can really afford the kind of cap hit that he's going to be, asking for. And there are teams that have been talking about, like Vegas. If Vegas can move out that $7 million from Marc-Andre Fleury's contract, that opens them up a little bit to maybe signing him. The Flyers' name has been tossed in there. The Vancouver Canucks' name has been tossed in there. Although Vancouver right now is locked in with Boston as the two teams that Oliver Ekman-Larsson would accept a trade to, which is interesting. I think he could really be good for the Vancouver Canucks, but Pietrangelo is not necessarily gone from the St. Louis Blues, but it looks like things are pointing that way. He's a great ad for several teams in the league. Like I said, it's kind of hard to predict who you would really go to. Teams that could use a guy like him, the Winnipeg Jets. I'm just spitballing off the top of my head. I'm not taking into account the cap situations. The Jets, the Canucks, the Flyers, maybe to round out that top four, since Gostisbehere is not what it used to be, and Niskanen just retired. Those are some of the names I think off the top of my head that could use a guy like him. Any team would love a guy like Alex Pietrangelo. It's just going to come down to whether or not a team makes the room for him at this point. And unfortunately for Alex Pietrangelo, there are other big-name free agents available in the market, like Torrey Krug from the Boston Bruins. His name is going to be out there. Again, another one of those situations where the Bruins have been told that he will still talk to them, but it's looking more and more like the Bruins are looking elsewhere. And oddly enough, for some reason, the Bruins are in on Oliver Ekman-Larsson right now, and I'm not really sure why. If you gave me a choice between Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Torrey Krug, unless Krug has just told the Bruins, look, I want a bigger role with another team, I'm not sure why you would pick Oliver Ekman-Larsson over Torrey Krug. I think Torrey Krug plays Bruins hockey way more than Oliver Ekman-Larsson does, but maybe that's what they're looking for. Maybe they're looking to shake up that defense and add a little bit more offensive flair in the form of a guy like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, as opposed to Torrey Krug, who's no slouch offensively. He put up 49 points last year, but maybe a guy like Oliver Ekman-Larsson to really anchor the power play on, or something along those lines. If they're looking for a cheap offensive defenseman, Tyson Barrie's name is also going to be on the free agent board. He put up 39 points with the Toronto Maple Leafs last year. Just based on the media treatment that he got and the perception around the league, you can probably get Tyson Barrie on a pretty cheap contract right now. And he can definitely anchor that first or second power play for you. I don't know what else to say there is about Tyson Barrie other than I think it'd be worth it. I definitely think it's worth it for a team to take a chance on Tyson Barrie. You're going to get him at a low-risk contract, most likely. You can sign him for a year or two, probably at like $2 to $3 million. Best case scenario, who comes out and puts up another 40-point season for you. If you use him the way he should be used, which is a offensive power play specialist, and you don't use him the way Toronto used him, which is I'm expecting you to also be good in your own end, which Tyson Barrie's never really been fantastic in his own end. You could probably get a good value out of him. Or if you're looking for another offensive type guy, Kevin Shattenkirk's on the market. Troy Stecher, oddly enough, is not going to get a qualifying offer from Vancouver Canucks. They're letting Troy Stecher walk, which is really weird to me. considering that Chris Tanev is also an unrestricted free agent. And I'm not sure why you would let Troy Stecher walk along with Chris Tanev. If you had to sign one of the two, I think the Canucks need a guy like Chris Tanev more than they need a guy like Troy Stecher, because you still have Quinn Hughes to anchor that first power play unit, or to quarterback that first power play unit. Whereas a guy like Chris Tanev, you're really looking for him to solidify that penalty kill, that top four, hard nose to the grindstone type defenseman. Whereas you don't really need a guy like Troy Stecher in your top four at this point, but it's still nice to have him. He was one of the more interesting names I saw out there being thrown around, is Troy Stecher walking away from the Vancouver Canucks. Very strange situation there, if you're asking me. Some other names we have going on: Justin Schultz from the Pittsburgh Penguins, Travis Hamonic of the Calgary Flames. I just mentioned Chris Tanev. It's Daniel Chara. Who knows if he's going to play or if he's just going to straight up retire. One of the guys that did retire also today, Justin Williams, did retire from the Carolina Hurricanes, so they're going to be in the market for a top six forward now. So we'll see. I know there's several guys on here that I think kind of fly under the radar. I think Chris Tanev is sneakily one of the more interesting names on this board. I think a team like the Winnipeg Jets could really use a guy like Chris Tanev, another Dylan DeMello type guy, a solid, reliable defensive defenseman to really kind of anchor your penalty kill on and really solidify the defense around. The Winnipeg Jets have enough offense in their forwards. They have enough offense from their defensemen right now. So really to get a couple guys, like maybe you sign a Chris Tanev and a Travis Hamonic. You sign two guys like that, two relatively cheap defensemen. You can definitely, round out your defensive core like that. You have your offensive pieces, you have your defensive pieces, and really I think if the Winnipeg Jets sign both Chris Tanev and Travis Hamonic, or two guys of that ilk, somebody in that kind of nature, I'd feel good about them saying that, yeah, the Winnipeg Jets are Stanley Cup contenders again. Just because I think they're both sneakily two of the more reliable defensive defensemen. The defense market is definitely better. I would say out of the three, out of defense, forwards, and goalies, it's the second best market this year. You've got a lot of really nice offensive pieces like, Tyson Barrie, Kevin Shattenkirk, Troy Stecher, and then you got a good mix of your two-way guys like your Pietrangelo, your Torrey Krug, and then you get your mix of your defensive guys, your Travis Hamonic, Chris Tanev, Daniel Chara, if he plays, kind of situation. So it's going to be interesting to see where these guys go. Several teams, you need these type of defensemen. Winnipeg, I think, obviously should be involved in this market. Vancouver, obviously, at this point, needs to be involved in this market, considering two of their guys just walked away. And you don't want to take a step back if you're the Vancouver Canucks. You want to keep going forward. You want to build off what you did this year. You don't want to rush to conclusions and start selling out the young guys for the veterans at this point yet, I don't think. Especially because, as we're going to get to with the goaltenders, Jacob Markstrom looks more and more likely like he's going to free agency at this point. You don't want to sell out the young guys just yet, but you don't want to take a step back and start regressing. Free agent forwards, some of the more interesting names on here. Obviously, the big two everyone's talking about. Mike Hoffman of the Florida Panthers scored 29 goals, put up 59 points, and Taylor Hall of the Arizona Coyotes. Super unfortunate situation for Arizona. You have to feel for them because, they basically got handed a super raw deal, and you have to in what happened with John Chayka, and you have to think that if Chayka was checked out, that's probably part of the reason why Taylor Hall hadn't signed an extension to that point. I mean, I didn't think he was going to sign an extension until we saw what happened with them in the playoffs anyway, but you have to think that maybe if Chayka wasn't mentally engaged and he kind of felt like he didn't want to be there, that's part of the reason why we might have seen Taylor Hall not sign an extension. And it looks more and more likely that he will not be signing with the Arizona Coyotes, and that's just super unfortunate for them. They essentially just traded away all those picks and prospects for half a season of Taylor Hall, made it to the first round of the playoffs, and got absolutely stomped. Some other interesting names: Evgeny Dadonov, Tyler Toffoli, And Anthony Duclair, all of these guys scored more than 20 goals. Duclair had scored 23, Toffoli 24, Dadonov 25. Some really nice offensive pieces in this free agent forward market, as well as some nice depth pieces. Wayne Simmons, Pat Maroon, Kyle Clifford, Matt Martin, all available depth, kind of nose to the grindstone, heart and soul type players. So you get a really nice mix of talent as well as your role players. Interesting for Ottawa to not even qualify Anthony Duclair after the season that he had. Maybe they're thinking it's a flash in the pan, but I mean, he's only 24, so it couldn't have hurt to try to maybe give him a bridger, like a bridge deal, and get him to stay on the team for a little bit longer to kind of see the vision pan out of what this roster should be. Yeah, very interesting for them not to sign him. I think, for certain teams, it's worth taking a flyer on him. I mean, he's coming off a 24-goal season or a 23-goal season. Maybe this is Anthony Duclair's peak. Oh, goodness. Sorry, guys. Maybe this is Anthony Duclair's peak. Maybe it's not. Maybe he turns into a reliable second/third line speedy 20-goal scorer. There are some teams that I think it's worth taking a look at. The Detroit Red Wings could look into Anthony Duclair. Depending on how much money he wants, a team like the Edmonton Oilers or the Toronto Maple Leafs, who have a depth scoring issue, although they need other help, but we'll kind of get to that. The Colorado Avalanche could take a look at him as a cheap depth scoring option, so they're maybe not so top heavy. The Florida Panthers could maybe take a look at Anthony Duclair as a nice, second or third line piece there. Certain teams that just need that extra little hint of scoring on their second and third lines, depending on the price he's asking for. If he's asking to get paid like a 20-goal scorer, like he's asking for $4 or $5 million, I wouldn't be thrilled with signing Anthony Duclair to a $4 or $5 million contract at this point in his career. Only just because this is really the first time he's kind of, exploded like this and put up like 23 goals, right? Mike Hoffman's name has been thrown around a lot. He's a really nice 30-goal scoring power play type guy. The New York Islanders could certainly use a player like him. Who else could use a guy like him? The Islanders could use a guy like him. Maybe a team like the Arizona Coyotes could use a guy like him. Certain teams that are more anemic on offense, the Nashville Predators could certainly use a guy like Mike Hoffman. You could see... Montreal could use a guy like him. Just a kind of guy that you can rely on to put the puck in the back of the net, especially on that power play being the one-timer option from the side. He's one of the better, one-timer options on a power play in the NHL at this point. So it's kind of unfortunate for the Florida Panthers that it looks like he's walking. But maybe it's better for certain teams because right now his name is being overshadowed by that of Taylor Hall. Taylor Hall is the big fish, so to speak, of the forwards of free agency, although it's weird because he only scored 16 goals last year as opposed to the 29, 25, 24, and 23 that the other guys scored. It's weird. Again, and Steve and I have been over this over and over and over. We don't understand why Taylor Hall is the only 20 to 25 goal scorer in the NHL to get treated like he's a 40 goal scorer every single season. I don't understand where the hype comes from. I mean, I know that he's a good player. 52 points is nothing to sneeze at. But he's a 20 to 25 goal scorer consistently who can't stay healthy and gets treated like he scores 50 goals every year. We're talking about this guy like he's Steven Stamkos or Alex Ovechkin or Nikita Kucherov. Well, he's just not. If somebody comes out and pays Taylor Hall $6 million again, I think that's perfectly fine. I think that's a great cap hit for Taylor Hall. You score your 25 goals, he'll get you 70 points, $6 to $7 million for a guy like him. Great. But the narrative is that we're going to pay this guy like $8 to $9 million to do what? To not play a full season, not score 40 goals? I don't understand where the hype around him comes from. That being said, he's definitely a piece that a lot of teams can use. You can basically just copy the list of teams that I just said for Mike Hoffman and add Hall, Dadonov, and Tyler Toffoli onto that list as far as what team should be, pursuing these type of players. Tyler Toffoli, I think, is going to be a sneaky good signing, kind of a quote-unquote consolation prize for a team that misses out on Hoffman, Hall, and Dadonov, although it's not really a consolation prize when you think about it because he's a 24-goal scorer who was only making 4.6 last year, and he brings a lot more to the table in terms of his all-around game than some of these other guys. Like Taylor Hall's pretty one-dimensional, Mike Hoffman's pretty one-dimensional. Tyler Toffoli brings a little bit more to the table, I think, in terms of his two-way play and in terms of his physical play and just the kind of stuff he can do on the ice, not to mention he's younger than both Hoffman and Dadonov by a couple of years. There's also some nice depth pieces. Wayne Simmons' name has been linked heavily to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Pat Maroon, Kyle Clifford, and Matt Martin are also available. Kyle Dubas has claimed that he wants to be harder to play against. We'll see how much he's really going to stick to that because it is Kyle Dubas, and he seems to be hell-bent on puck possession. But if he wants to sign Wayne Simmons, I'm not really sure why he also isn't just going to sign Kyle Clifford. Now, keep in mind that this is being recorded the day before free agency starts. So by the time free agency does, in fact, start, some of these guys could, in fact, be signed by then. So take that for what it's worth. But at this point, it doesn't really look like, it doesn't really look like a lot of these guys are going to be signed. And the question for me is, if you're going to sign Wayne Simmons, why wouldn't you also just sign Kyle Clifford again? You can't just have one piece and say, okay, we're hard to play against now because we have Wayne Simmons on the team. That's not how that works. If you look at the Tampa Bay Lightning this year, they had Pat Maroon the entire way, and then they also traded for Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow because they realized just having one guy who's a grinder, who hits people and who's hard to play against isn't enough. So, if I'm the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm taking a look at Wayne Simmons. I'm taking a look at Kyle Clifford to try to get him back. I'm taking a look at Matt Martin. If you can sign Matt Martin for another $2 million or less, definitely would, see the Toronto Maple Leafs signing him, especially after the playoffs that he had. And now that what's his face, Mike Babcock's not the coach, which I think is part of the reason why Matt Martin had so many issues in being scratched in Toronto, is because Babcock just didn't like him for some reason. I could see Matt Martin getting calls from the Toronto Maple Leafs. Some other teams that could use some depth grinders. The New York Rangers could use some help as far as defensive depth grinders. Toronto Maple Leafs. This is what I was saying earlier. The Edmonton Oilers really need some guys like this to play on the team. They really need defensive defensemen primarily, primarily a goalie, defensive defenseman second. But they need some guys that are harder to play against. They also need help with depth scoring. They need help in a lot of areas, but their primary, if you're going to get a forward, get a guy like Pat Maroon or Wayne Simmons or Kyle Clifford or Matt Martin at this point if you're the Edmonton Oilers, because you need guys like that to chip in a goal or two, yes, but also to wear down the opposition and make life easier for Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. So I could see the Edmonton Oilers being in on these guys. I could see the Colorado Avalanche being in on these guys. I could see the Dallas Stars being in on them just because the Dallas Stars love their depth grinders, but the Dallas Stars also have some cap problems. Going to be interesting to see what the Lightning do to try to retain some of their grittiness. We'll see if they are in on any of these guys. They're kind of in a cap crunch as well. It seems like most of the league is at this point, but we've heard rumors that Toronto is in on Kyle Clifford or Wayne Simmons, so we'll see what that deal is. He's definitely not going to be making $5 million again. He'll probably be making like $2 million, which is a fair contract for a guy like Wayne Simmons. He can put in 25 points, but that's not his job. So the forward market, Decent amount of talent, a lot of depth coming out in the forward market this year, a lot of grinders. It's going to be interesting to see where these guys go. I'm most looking forward to tracking where Tyler Toffoli, Anthony Duclair, and Kyle Clifford / Matt Martin. I'm interested to see where these guys go. And perhaps the best, and I think, in fact, the best market this year is in the goaltenders. We have several names in the goalie market, several big names in the goalie market. Just to name a few: Braden Holtby, Jacob Markstrom, Mike Smith, Thomas Greiss, Corey Crawford, Anton Khudobin, and Henrik Lundqvist are the names that I picked out as far as the goalies that are going to be available this year. Now, it's all but confirmed at this point that Braden Holtby will not be coming back to the Washington Capitals. The Chicago Blackhawks announced today that Corey Crawford will not be returning, so he's definitely a free agent. We know that Henrik Lundqvist is a free agent. We've heard rumors that Khudobin has been in talks with the Dallas Stars, but it seems like they're not offering him the amount of money that he wants. He's coming off a $2.5 million contract. Maybe he's looking for something like $4.5 million after that Stanley Cup playoff run. But it looks like at this point, again, similar to the Pietrangelo situation, he's willing to go back. The money has to be there for Anton Khudobin, so we'll see what ends up happening with him. Robin Lehner was a guy that we were all looking at on the market. He's locked into the Vegas Golden Knights, and this isn't even counting the guys that are probably on the trade block. We know for a fact that Marc-Andre Fleury at this point is on the trade block. And I stand by my analysis that Fleury will find a home, but he has to wait until these guys are off the market. He has to wait till Holtby, Markstrom, who at this point is looking more and more like Markstrom will be going to free agency. There was a lot of talk of Markstrom staying with the Vancouver Canucks after the season that he had, the breakout season that he had. But as we get closer and closer to the final hour, the reports that are coming out are looking more and more like Jacob Markstrom will be a free agent. We've seen Fleury being offered. I have to assume, again, going back to this, that you have to think that Jake Allen is on the market. I can't imagine them going into the season with Jacob Markstrom and Carey Price in net. It just seems like that wouldn't be a thing. We knew Matt Murray was on the market. He's now off the market with the Ottawa Senators. Just a lot of goalies flying around here. Teams that should be in on guys like, we'll say, Holtby and Markstrom specifically. I think the Buffalo Sabres should definitely be looking into these guys. The Edmonton Oilers should 110 million% finally invest in a goalie and look at one of these guys. You could see the Colorado Avalanche taking a peek, although they seem to be pretty happy with Philip Grubauer. So what did I say? I said Edmonton, Buffalo, Carolina should probably be looking at some of these guys. I really do think that Buffalo, Edmonton are the two biggest teams that they desperately need goaltending help. And they have teams that are okay, but would maybe be able to take another step for the Edmonton Oilers, be a legitimate playoff contender, and for the Buffalo Sabres perhaps be a playoff team if they signed one of those guys. I think either one of those guys would take those teams to that next level. And then you got guys, your platoon type goalies, your Mike Smith, Thomas Greiss, Crawford, and Khudobin at this point in their career. I think Thomas Greiss and Khudobin are head and shoulders above where Crawford and Smith are at this point in their careers. Some teams that could be looking for guys like them. The Washington Capitals could look for a guy like them. If the Hurricanes are dead set convinced that Peter Mrazek is the answer, they could potentially look at some of these guys, but they still have James Reimer. Maybe a team like Colorado Avalanche, they like Francouz and they like Grubauer. Maybe they take a peek at one of those guys, although I don't think so. Obviously, the thought is that if you're trading away Marc-Andre Fleury, you're going to need to sign a backup, although I don't think that they're going to be in the market for a platoon backup. In Vegas, they're probably just going to get like a true backup, a guy who's only really expecting to play maybe 20 games a season. Thomas Greiss and Anton Khudobin, they still have a lot to offer. A lot of teams in the NHL, I still think they're legitimately good goaltenders, and they should definitely find a home with somebody. Maybe the Vancouver Canucks, instead of signing Markstrom to $6 million or however much money he's going to want, maybe they sign one of these platoon type goalies that if Thatcher Demko ends up struggling a little bit, they have a reliable backup to go to. Mike Smith and Corey Crawford are reliable options, sort of, although you'd want to get Thomas Greiss or Anton Khudobin first. I'm not sure what the market for a guy like Mike Smith or Crawford is. I'm not sure where they're at mentally, if they're ready to, Mike Smith is 38, Crawford is 35. I'm not sure if they're ready to resign themselves to being true backups yet. If they are, there's plenty of teams that need backup goaltenders, so we'll see with them. Henrik Lundqvist is definitely an interesting one because he's been linked to the Washington Capitals a lot. They're saying that the Capitals appear to be the front runner for the services of the King, Henrik Lundqvist. And it makes sense to me. Much in the way that the Pittsburgh Penguins are kind of going in blind with Tristan Jarry to an extent, the Capitals are going in blind with Ilya Samsonov. It's his second year in the league next season. And for a team that has Stanley Cup aspirations, such as the Washington Capitals, it's a big risk. It's a really big risk to go into the year with an unproven starter and say he's going to start like 60 games. So I think that they desperately need to be in the market for a Greiss, a Khudobin, or apparently a Henrik Lundqvist. You don't want to sign a Holtby or a Markstrom because primarily you can't afford them. But you can probably afford to throw $3 million at Thomas Greiss or Corey Crawford. You can afford to throw that $3 million at Henrik Lundqvist. Because best case scenario, Samsonov proves that last year wasn't a fluke. He plays fantastic, and you go back and you make a playoff push. Worst case scenario, if Samsonov falters, you don't want to be the playoff caliber team with the goalie that holds you back. So guys like Greiss and Khudobin have repeatedly proven that not only can they get it done in the regular season, Greiss proved it last year and Khudobin proved it last year, that they still got it when it comes to the postseason. I mean, Khudobin went to the Stanley Cup Finals. Greiss posted a couple of really big games for the Islanders, including a Game 7 shutout of the Flyers. Thomas Greiss has won them series before. Back in 2016, he won the series against the Florida Panthers for them when Yaroslav Halak went down with injury. So it's going to be really interesting to see. I think that, Washington's a really big team that needs to be in the market for a platooner. We could see potentially Pittsburgh in the market for a platooner, although it looks like they're going to be rocking Tristan Jarry and Casey DeSmith. I expect to see Fleury traded after most of the big name goalies have gone out the way. I expect Jake Allen's name to be at least talked about. I'm not sure. We'll see with him, but the teams that I expect to be most active, I expect the Toronto Maple Leafs to be active. I expect the Ottawa Senators to be active just because they have a lot of cap room. I expect the Capitals to be active in the goalie market. I expect the Canucks to be active. It's going to be really interesting. I don't think Pietrangelo is going to sign on the first day, to be honest with you. I think the first day is going to go really slowly until Pietrangelo signs on like day 2 or 3, and then you're just going to see the floodgates open as far as defensemen and forwards go. Goalies are a little different. I expect goalies to go pretty much right away on the first day. But I think the forward market is going to be kind of stunted until Pietrangelo goes, and then the teams that kind of know where they are at that point. And I think the pieces will fall into place after that. So the next podcast that we'll be doing will be our free agency wrap-up when most of the big guys have gone off market. So I'm not sure if that's going to be a week from now, a couple days from now. Like if a couple days from now, if basically all the guys that I just mentioned are already off the market, totally we'll do another podcast and kind of wrap it up. But we're going to wait until see when most of the big guys are off the market. So I'm not sure when that will be, but whenever that is, we will see you guys then. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys next time.